Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We had a poll yesterday on our community page in which you good folk voted for what you'd like to see next. As I'm going into production on this episode, let's look. The winner is Werewolf Transformation Eyewitness with 39%, followed closely by recent quarantine Dogman lockdown run-ins, which has 34%. If we do a show today that has a story for each, would that satisfy 73% of you? Or alienate everyone? But before we get to any of that, please welcome the executive producer of this next story, an all-new channel member named Alex. Wait, just Alex? I wonder which Alex. I wonder if it's Alex Trebek, Alexander the Great, Alexander the Hamilton? If you're the latter, can you get me Broadway tickets? I'm kidding, of course, because you've already done so much, Alex, by becoming a new channel member. If you'd like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Alexander the Great, you can become a channel member like he did, or else join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Either way, you'll get over 9 hours of secret, uncensored Dogman stories, too wild to ever go on this channel, plus a new scary, uncensored Dogman story each Sunday for executive producers only. Speaking of wild stories, each of these 2 stories today has 2 Dogman encounters in them. The second one, Quarantine Dogman near Chestnut Ridge, takes place just last week and tells us of a terrifying recent Dogman encounter in Pennsylvania. We'll get to that in a while though, because this first story won our poll yesterday. It's an all-new tale of a modern-day werewolf, and it has a tie-in with another recent Dogman or werewolf sighting from England, of all places. This thing was seen by multiple witnesses over multiple nights, and our story submitter explains why he feels personally that he knows why the werewolf sightings near Hull stopped in 2016. And he'll explain his theory in the story that we call My Brother Was the Werewolf of Hull. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am the brother of someone who is afflicted with lycanthropy. I have only become aware of this situation in the last 30 months or so, but I know he had been struggling with it for at least 1 year prior. I continue to gather evidence that this all started further back than that, but my brother will answer none of my questions related to the topic, so I am still not certain. I don't know how this happened to him, and I don't know when, but I do think he may have had something to do with historical Dogman encounters reported in England in 2016. I'm referring specifically to the sightings of a vicious, 8-foot-tall, canine-eating Dogman outside of Hull in the United Kingdom back in 2016. That was the year when my brother was abroad. We know for a fact that he was in England the week before a woman reported standing on a bridge and seeing a man transform into a wolf-like creature, most resembling an American werewolf in London. She said she saw it drop to all fours and run away. Let's examine this alleged sighting for a moment before proceeding. This encounter was reported by the Daily Express newspaper out of the UK back on May 15th, 2016, 4 years ago this month. There, you can see the actual headline, so you know that if this is a lie, at least it isn't my lie. Inside the article, It says there had been a number of sightings in a small period of time in this abandoned area called Beverly and Barmston Drain. Not to be confused with Beverly and Skidney Drain or Figham Drain or any of the other drains in the area. I don't know of anything like this in the United States, but according to the article in the Express, Beverly and Barmston Drain is a canal dug out of the earth in the late 1700s for the purpose of drying out salt marshes. Does that mean it was like a salt farm? I'm not sure. One unnamed woman is claimed by the article to have reported witnessing the creature change from man to Dogman from a bridge over the drain. So let's look on Google Maps for a bridge. It could be this here, but this one down here looks more like something a lady might stand on. The quote from the woman in the Express read, "It was stood upright one moment, then next it was down on all fours running like a dog. I was terrified." Her story gets even more interesting, but I'm not sure how much I can legally quote here, so I'll paraphrase. I don't know where the man was standing when he changed, but she says he bounded on all fours like a dog for a while, then rose to his hind legs to run down the embankment toward the water. Rather than entering the water, though, he vaulted, presumably bipedally, 30 feet in one leap over the river of drain water beneath him. As if that weren't enough of a display, he then is said to have run up the far embankment and leaped over a wall, ending up out of view. I'm not sure I see a wall near either of these bridges, but there's no Google Street View in this area. We can only look down from above or go to this slight 3D angle. Still don't know if I see a wall. There is another, possibly even more terrifying report from a couple who claimed they saw a creature so tall that it could hold a German shepherd in its teeth while jumping an 8-foot fence and running away. Now that is quite a set of jaws. A bear couldn't do that, could it? I don't think so, but I'm willing to be proven wrong. So the British have such a long history, they were actually able to find another time in the history of that one little area in which there had been stories of a big pain-in-the-butt dogman who had made their lives difficult back hundreds of years ago. And, in their English way, they gave the dogman the nickname Old Stinker. In America, if we see a dogman, we're lucky if we don't faint. The British, they just call him Old Stinker and get back about their business. If anyone wonders why the reports of the impossibly large dog-eating predator seemed to have suddenly ceased, they are told that's just the way Old Stinker is. He might show up again tomorrow, or maybe not for another 100 years. Nobody knows, because nobody can predict the return of a living legend. Now, I didn't know anything about the 2016 werewolf sightings near Hull when I was invited by my brother's wife to lunch back in 2018. My brother, let's call him Henry, and I had been estranged since our teenage years back in the 1980s. Although we were never entirely out of touch with each other, we had said nothing meaningful to each other for our entire adult lives. We were never openly at war. We always said happy birthday or Merry Christmas on social media, but that was the extent of our entire relationship. I never had a problem with that, and I never would have renewed the acquaintance. He and I didn't like each other, as far back as I can remember. Well, I liked him for a while when I was young because I was the younger of the two of us, and it's really hard not to look up to your older brother. But he rejected me at every turn and made it clear that he would have no problem with me entirely staying out of his life permanently. When his wife, let's call her June, called me on the old school telephone to ask me to meet up with her for lunch, I asked her if my brother was dying. She laughed and informed me that we all die, sooner or later. I laughed too and agreed to the meeting. Remember back when we used to have these things called restaurants? the kind that didn't have police warning tape over the seats, where you could sit at a table in a room without your face covered like a bandit. Well, this story happened back when all that was still a thing. June, as it turned out, had not informed Henry that she was meeting me. She wanted to talk to me entirely for her own personal reasons, all of which, except for the very most personal, I'm about to spill here for your entertainment. June needed an ally, in the old sense of the word. She needed a friend. My brother had abused and terminated every other relationship in his life, whether friendly or familial. Nobody else would have anything to do with him. June had no choice but to turn to me, she said, because she could no longer handle Henry on her own. I at first smirked when she said that. I thought how hard it had been for me to have to grow up in the same house with him, and I would have to agree. Henry was a lot to handle. But the look on her face told me that this was about something more than Henry being difficult again. I could tell by the mix of fear and catatonia in June's eyes that this was a larger than normal situation that I was about to walk into. My mind went to wondering if my brother was involved in crime or drugs, or if he was abusive to June. I felt frightened, not sensing any internal confidence that I could help anybody with problems like that, let alone my intimidating older brother. June didn't tell me what the problem was, though. She got me to agree to help her before she provided me with the first detail. I wondered then, and I still wonder, what it would be like to have a woman like June so loyal to me. Heck, I wonder what it would be like to have a dog that loyal. Is it a requirement that all the best women have to be devoted to energy-draining narcissists? Or only the nice women that I like? I would have been loyal to her in a second. I suppose that's why she has no interest in me. She wants someone it's challenging to be loyal to, and I would be too easy. June drove me for hours out to some place west of New York on the mainland. I have no idea where we were, but there were a lot of trees around. We had gone past the scary-looking industrial plants and refineries into long stretches of forest, occasionally interrupted by shopping centers. It could have been New Jersey. It could have been Connecticut. It could have been Pennsylvania. We left the highway and entered onto local roads that looked like sets from a horror movie. I thought this meant we were almost there, but we ended up driving almost as long on these old, weird local roads with deep potholes and other obstructions slowing the drive down significantly. I was thinking that the deeper I went into this forest with this lady, the harder it was going to be for me to ever get back out again. You know, unless I'm forgetting someone, I don't think we saw anyone else for the rest of that ride. When we reached my brother, he was at an old, medium-sized house in the forest, brooding, in a room on the second floor, looking out a barred window onto his back porch and yard. He seemed entirely unfazed to see either one of us and immediately commenced talking about himself. After 20 minutes of his monologue, I realized he had been revealing nothing about himself or anything else. I stopped listening and asked June how I could get a sandwich or something in the middle of these woods. She guided me out of the room, and Henry just kept on talking as though somebody were still listening. I couldn't tell if he had changed at all since I knew him so far. It kind of just seemed like Henry being Henry. June closed the door behind us and locked it in such a way that it became apparent that she was locking him into that room. When I looked more closely, I saw that the door and the room seemed as though they were rebuilt more recently than the rest of the house. For one thing, they were reinforced, as though this room had been designed to hold the Hulk from the Avengers until Nick Fury could come pick him up or something. I was settling in on mental illness being the reason this was all going on. I just hoped it was Henry who was the crazy one, since he was locked in, and June was walking right next to me. She took me to the kitchen where she sat me down and produced sandwich makings for me to create whatever Dagwood kind of masterpiece I wanted. We talked for a while about minor issues, and then, when I was finished eating and the sky had grown dark, my brother's wife took me by the hand and led me back to my brother's room. Instead of unlocking the door for us to go back inside, she slid open a viewing section on that door and allowed me to peer in on my brother. He was sitting in the room silently, staring out of the lone window. I saw what I saw. Then I turned to June and I gave her a questioning look. Yes, there sat my brother, but why was I supposed to care? The moon is coming out now, she told me, adding, "It'll happen soon enough." I was about to tell her that statement made absolutely no sense to me when my brother shouted from inside the room. He hadn't said any word. He had just made a pained sound. I looked in and saw him stand up suddenly and clumsily knocking his chair over behind him. He screamed, sounding as angry as he sounded in pain. I looked at June, alarmed, but could see by her expression that she was very used to all of this. I told myself to calm down, that this was my brother's life, but I remained alarmed, frightened for the safety of this guy on the other side of that door that would never have cared if I lived or died. As my brother shrieked, I saw his body grow straight up until his face was pressed sideways against the reinforced ceiling. His clothes basically shredded themselves and fell away onto the floor around him. They now formed an avant-garde circular design on the floor, marking my now much taller brother as the epicenter of some sort of phenomenon. The changes that happened all occurred quickly, far more quickly than you see them happen in movies. He became covered in fur in seconds. It was like he had 5 o'clock shadow all over, and then he had fur all over, and then longer and shaggier fur. His head grew tall, pointed ears, and he fell forward, knocking the table out of his way. He was a canine, an immense, ridiculously large canine, and he ran around the room on all fours, braying and barking and howling and snarling. He grew desperate to get out of the now small, locked room, and he began making sounds so pained and horrible that I asked June to please take me away from that place. She took me away, and we spent time together, with her doing her best to convince me to stay at that house. She didn't use words to ask me, but she asked me all right. By the morning, I knew that I was going to stay, but that it had nothing to do with helping my brother and everything to do with helping June. Neither of them will tell me anything about how he got lycanthropy or how long he's been like this. I can never be sure if he's lost his mind or if he's still the same old Henry, just stuck in a situation that has him feeling a bit cuckoo. We keep him locked up all the time. Not always in that room, but he spends the 3 nights of the full moon there. He's never allowed out of the house, not even into the garden, and yet he never complains about it. I don't really see how June actually needs me. Yes, he becomes a werewolf 3 nights each month. I've seen it with my own eyes. On those nights, she stays with me, not him. So maybe she needs me for other things besides protection. I wish that my evil brother could be out of the way and that I could have June for my own, but I know she would never stay with me. She isn't loyal to me, she's loyal to him, even though she knows my brother was the werewolf of Hull. Don't go anywhere. We've got an all-new story alleged to have taken place just last week. It's called Quarantine Dogman near Chestnut Ridge. And it begins right after this.
I shall return. Like last night's triple lupa, I shall return. I'll be back here May 23rd to help host our Memorial Day Military Dogman stories. All stories alleged to have happened to military service people or veterans. I'm gonna read one of the stories myself. You won't want to miss it. It should prove to be quite memorial.
Quarantine Dogman near Chestnut Ridge. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I agreed to help my 85-year-old mom deliver food around Pennsylvania to people who are old or who have sensitive immune systems. I had avoided all trips near the Chestnut Ridge area because I'm afraid to go there. I will freely admit it. I just did. I'm afraid of the Chestnut Ridge area, and I would prefer never to go there at all. And I know it's a lovely place, and I know there are plenty of great people living there, but I'm allergic to monsters. Not literally, I don't sneeze if monsters are nearby. I'm scared to death of monsters, and it goes back to a Dogman experience in my youth. I'm going to tell you all about that so that you understand why I practically shut down once I got lost at night over there on Park Street in Grindstone, not far from Chestnut Ridge. See, years ago, my uncle used to live near Chestnut Ridge, off in the woods a ways. This was a long time back. I'm talking like back when NBC used to show that animated Peacock before TV shows. My Uncle Chuck was the only member of our family who had a color TV, so all my memories of that color Peacock must come from his house. His TV was one of those giant things that was an entire piece of furniture. I think if you opened up the wooden cabinet it was in, there was a record player up on top. Vinyl before people really called it vinyl. We would go to Uncle Chuck's place on Sundays in the summer, me, my sister, and our parents. We'd arrive in the afternoon, have lunch, play in the backyard, have dinner, watch The Wonderful World of Disney or Ed Sullivan or something like that, then pile in the car and fall asleep on the way home. But there was one summer Sunday back then that was different from all the others. On that night, we kept hearing what I thought sounded like a wolf howling outside. Uncle Chuck kept insisting it was one of the neighbor's dogs, but Aunt Clara didn't think it sounded like one of the dogs that she knew. Soon, the howling was joined by more howling, and this time, Aunt Clara identified each of the dogs from the area by name as they joined in with the howling. She still had no name for the first howler, though, and she was getting Uncle Chuck annoyed. He wanted to be right, but he didn't know even one of the local dogs. He only cared about his own stuff. His own lawn, his own garden, his own car. He knew the names of his neighbors on either side of him so that he could talk about them behind their backs, but he didn't know anyone else who lived around there. It was during the Walt Disney show that things really started going haywire. Something began hitting into the house, harder each time. I don't know where they were hitting it, but it felt like the entire building was being shaken from the roots on up. It kind of felt like an earthquake was happening at points during it too. My sister was screaming and crying. My father was cursing at her to shut up. My mother was screeching at my father not to use foul language around her daughter. Uncle Chuck was telling Aunt Clara to shut up, while she was telling him that something had just hit the house. "I think we know that already, Clara," he shouted. In a crisis, my family would always pull together. I ran to one of the windows wanting to see what was doing this to us. I got the distinct impression that none of the adults had the slightest idea. What I saw out there imprinted itself on my brain like nothing else that has happened to me in my life. There is no other event of my childhood which hit me as hard as this event, and there is no other moment of my adult life which can even be placed in the same league as this one traumatic minute of time in the 1960s. What I saw out that window was at first a dark gray and black lion. Then I leaned forward, cupping my hands around my eyes to see better into the yard. It was dark out there, but it was bright in the room behind me. I needed to block out all the interior light if I wanted to see any detail out there at all. And when I did so, I no longer saw a lion. I saw a lion-sized black dog with a gray mane. What I'm trying to describe is a dog that was dark all over and far larger than your average dog. It had short, very dark hair covering it from head to paws. The fur on its head and shoulders, though, that was longer and slightly lighter colored. The ears poked up tall and pointed and were not cat ears. The snout was long, almost like a Doberman, and its eyes and features were canine. It was more muscular than any dog I had seen up to that time, although I'd never seen a pit bull yet. Imagine a black pit bull body scaled up and somehow even more muscular. Imagine it black with a dark lion's mane and with a Doberman's head, all in black. That would be sort of what I saw. And then I saw it run toward the house, its head held down like a bull. It ran toward my left, and a split second after it left my field of vision, it slammed back into the house so hard I was knocked from my seat on the radiator by the window. The family erupted once again as I climbed up to peer out back. There was smoke and dust emanating from where the creature had hit the house, and I saw him retreating to the same spot to do the identical thing all over again. I called out to my family to come look. I told them it was a big dog acting like a bull, and it was going to break into the house. I told them and told them. They ignored me, shouting louder over me. I tried shouting louder still, but was able to get the attention of exactly 0 of them. Dejected, I looked out the window and saw that I had actually won the attention of someone after all. That big dog was then looking straight at me. I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. I actually felt my chest seize up. It was probably a panic attack or something. The big dog was looking at me, and it was getting kind of, I'm not sure how to say it. I guess it was getting annoyed or something? Maybe angry? Because then it did this thing that more than surprised me. It did the one thing that made me afraid of Chestnut Ridge for the rest of my life. That big dog stood up. I mean, it stood up on its hind legs like it was trying to scare me. I think it succeeded because I remember waking up when we were driving home. I don't remember anything between the Dogman standing up and showing me that it was some kind of a giant Dogman and not a normal dog at all, and waking up in the car. I remember asking, "What happened?" And my mother shouted at me, "Oh, now don't you start," which made no sense to me at all at the time. I did know it meant I'd better say nothing more, though, and I guess that was the most important message conveyed within the exasperated statement. Now, fast forward decades to the other day. My elderly but still very active mother had me over in her kitchen, and she was explaining which food items were to be delivered to which locations. When I balked at delivering near the Chestnut Ridge, she shouted at me saying, "Oh, now don't you start." It brought back a powerful wave of nostalgia and deja vu, all at the same time. It also reminded me of why I didn't want to go back there. My mother told me to put my big boy pants on and pretend I was an adult for the sake of the sick people that I was bringing food to. I knew she was right, and that I had no choice but to do as she suggested. But it didn't make me any less scared to do it. Of course, I delivered all of the food that wasn't by the Chestnut Ridge first. I saved the one I was frightened of for the last. The dumbest part about that plan was that it was now dark out, and I was more scared than I had already been before. I decided to deliver it in the morning and called my mom to tell her about my brilliant plan. She wouldn't even pick up the phone. She knew why I was calling. I was just going to have to suck it up and deliver the food package to this address. I was being silly, I told myself. Even if Dogman is a thing around these parts, the chances of me seeing one twice in one lifetime are probably the same as getting hit by lightning more than once. Of course, there are people who do actually get hit by lightning multiple times, I remembered. Every single thing I thought about was making me more scared. So, my GPS seemed to think that if I followed this street called Park Street, that it would bring me directly to the address I needed to arrive at. The problem with this was, when I actually followed the real Park Street, out in the real world, it didn't lead me to a shortcut to the address. It led me to this. A dead end in the woods. I parked the car and put my head down on the steering wheel, and I wanted to cry. I'm not saying I actually cried or anything. I'm saying that's what I wanted to do. After all this, I was going to have to backtrack and figure out another way to find this house. It was like it was never going to end. I was frustrated, and I was feeling sorry for myself. But for the first time all night, parked behind that private home to my right, and with the open field to my left and the woods in front, I was not feeling frightened. Embarrassed, maybe. Annoyed and impatient, definitely, but not frightened. I got done feeling sorry for myself with my head down on the wheel, and I lifted my eyes to begin to decide what to do next. And that was when I saw it. No matter what the odds, no matter what the unlikelihood, no matter what the impossibility, I saw it. Right there, coming out of the woods, I saw it. The eyes of the Dogman looked at me from between leaves and branches. I recognized them in the very first instant. The dog's face looked exactly, and I mean precisely, the same way it had looked that night when I was a kid. If the Dogman is an archetype and not an animal, then I suppose this was him. The same him from back then. If it's an actual living, breathing animal, though, then I guess this must have been the son or grandson of the one from my childhood. To me, it was the same thing. It was the Dogman. I was looking up into the eyes of the incredibly tall Dogman, and it was back in my life with an excruciating vengeance. I couldn't believe how tall the thing was, even taller than I remembered it from my youth, maybe 9 or 10 feet tall. Then it emerged from the woods, and I started my car engine, throwing the car into reverse. I saw that the Dogman was walking on all fours. If it was that tall when it was down on all fours, then my feelings started to go numb in my hands and my feet. I wasn't sure if my foot was hitting the gas pedal or not, and my vision was going spotty around the edges. I started reciting the Lord's Prayer, because it's the only prayer I know. I'm sure I got parts of it wrong, too. I'm not a religious man at all. I remember feeling too out of it to even turn my head around, but I also knew I needed to drive backward. I needed to get away from the creature, the dog, the monster dog. I stared forward, trying to stay awake, watching my progress in the rearview mirror in front of me. Beyond that mirror, I could see the dog, now out of the forest. I could see its mane. I could see its musculature. I could see its massive frame. I could sense its unhappiness with me. Then I watched as that dog stood up, and it looked like it was going to be as tall as the trees it was moving out in front of. My cell phone woke me up, and I realized I was in bed in my home. It was my mom on the phone, and she was telling me about my deliveries for the day. I had no memory of making my last delivery the night before, so I ran out to my car and I checked. The box of food was no longer in my back seat, so I must have delivered it somewhere. When I made my way over to Mom's later in that morning, I kind of expected her to bring it up, but she never did. So far, others have been picking up that delivery to the Chestnut Ridge, so at least for now, I haven't had to go back out there yet. I would formally beg Mom to never send me out there again, but I know that would only make her definitely send me out there again. Mom doesn't like whiners or weaklings. That's what Mom dislikes, but I dislike the Dogman. I've encountered it 2 times and had blackouts after both sightings. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to like about the Dogman. It's all bad if you ask me. I remain petrified, absolutely horrified that tomorrow morning my mom might send me back in the path of the quarantined Dogman near Chestnut Ridge.
Literal swarm of very tall, black-furred, upright-walking, humanoid dogmen. It was an entire pack of them.
And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.